Okay, so online with me, I got Nicholas Landau, who's done an interview for me before on the Aztecs. Was it, Nicholas? I think it was the Aztecs.
Mostly the Mayans. I talk a little about the Aztecs and a little bit
That's,
about the Olmec.
yeah. Okay, so he contacted me and says he has been researching and studying the giants, which is right up my alley, and I want to know more about this, Nicholas. So with that, man, spill your guts. Tell me what you got here. What you been up to?
So it's been about I would say about 4 years since we last spoke. So much has happened in that time. I had just finished high school when you first spoke with me, and I've now recently just acquired my master's degree in anthropology with a concentration in archaeology
Wow, cool.
from Binghamton University.
So I just want to say about that narrative you gave, because I was totally amazed about you being a kid and taking that much interest in
Yeah.
that subject and getting into so much detail. And now, man, look at you. You know, you got your anthropology master's, you said, or
Yeah, master's.
yeah. And so, man, I got to ask you, at an early age, you've had an interest in this kind of stuff, man. How did that happen? But that doesn't happen with most kids. How did that happen?
I think what really instilled my interest is the Museum of Natural History.
Ah,
During a visit I went when I was 8 years old. Normally we would see the dinosaurs, but in that day we decided to see basically the different exhibits they had about the indigenous cultures. Now, with that being said, I understand that there is a certain amount of political incorrectness for that to be featured in a natural history museum because you're talking about people, and of course where natural history, that's basically the history of nature, wildlife. So of course in this day and age it probably wouldn't be considered the most politically correct decision to feature cultures exhibits dealing with indigenous cultures in the natural history museum. But I mean it's probably been that way for probably a century now, because the natural history museum in New York City is not a very young place. But I must give it credit where credit is due, and it did help instill my fascination with the past, the human past, not just the past dealing with dinosaurs, but also the human story and the drama that revolved around past cultures. And then, of course, as I said in my previous interview, I went to the Yucatan when I was 16. And I got to see some of the Mayan pyramids.
cool. So now you've taken an interest in giants, and I want to hear all this about. I want to hear all about this because I remember when you were a kid, man, you dug into things and tried to really figure things out. Now that you're older, you're more educated, man, you're really probably digging in, know how to dig in. So let's hear about this.
So basically, so I think I was I think I was 13 thereabouts when I got a book called The Mysteries of the Unexplained. It was actually published by, I believe, Reader's Digest. And basically, it has a collection of stories, and some of the stories were about the giants. So I think that's basically what introduced me to the giants. And also, of course, the dubious ancient aliens. Of course, they had the segment about Lovelock Cave.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely apparent to me now that these were human beings, much like us, and just like me and you. These were not extraterrestrials. These were, yes, human beings. Now, of course, I know there are some people out there who have made the argument that yes, these were human beings, but perhaps they came from far away. I know that since you deal a lot with Brewer's Cave,
Yes.
so I know that there are some people who like the proponents of basically the translations of the tablets. They've come to the conclusion based off that these people might have been visitors from other continents. And of course, this is a sensitive issue. I have come to realize that I have to tread carefully.
Yes, with your master's degree, you probably do.
Mm-hmm.
So don't get yourself in trouble here.
Of course, since we live in the post NAGPRA era, right? You understand what NAGPRA, right?
Yeah, the Repatriation
Yeah.
Act. Yeah.
Of course, that kind of has put the brakes on some of this research for better or for worse. Of course, I can understand how this has benefited communities in the sense that they're getting their ancestors are now being returned to them. So because of that, I've come to the realization I have to tread very carefully, given the cultural sensitivity of these issues. And hopefully during my upcoming investigations that I'll get to soon, I'll be able to work with the communities that refer to these individuals as their ancestors. As I said off camera, given that this is an issue that many archaeologists would probably disapprove of non-archaeologists doing these types of investigations, I am refraining from stating what country this investigation is going to happen with and who the researchers are that I'm going to be working with.
Okay, so you're actively gonna are going to be
Mhm.
doing some research and for searching for the giants and who they were then.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay.
Yes. So basically, I am going to be examining an an individual who was allegedly in the 7 foot plus range. This person has not been formally analyzed, which is what I hope to do using different methods, and techniques, depending on how much of these remains or this individual's remains are intact.
So so
I,
you so you're saying you possibly have access to the remains of a 7 foot giant,
yes,
possibly.
that is
And
correct.
so you're gonna, well, go ahead, tell me what's your plans with that.
Um, Now, one of the reasons people have criticized the discoveries of the supposed giants that were made during the late 18, early 1900s is that the techniques that existed at the time were not what they are now. It wasn't really until the 1950s where these two individuals by the name of Trotter and Glazer determined how to accurately estimate an individual's stature simply from their bones alone, which is one of the methods I might be using, the Trotter and Glazer technique. There's also a more recent technique called the Foley technique, but that one's a little bit more difficult given that much more of the skeleton has to be intact for somebody to utilize the Foley technique. So the Trotter and Glazer technique, on the other hand, for the most part, revolves around the femurs and the humerus. So not as much of the skeleton is needed for this technique to be utilized. And with that being said, of course, since I'm dealing with South America, who these individuals' descendants are is a little bit up for debate because, of course, you're familiar with the concept of a mestizo, correct?
Uh-huh.
Basically, someone who has been brought up in the Spanish culture, but who is at least of partial indigenous descent. So I imagine that many of the researchers who I'd be working with would be mestizos. So in that sense, these individuals could possibly view the giant as an ancestor. So in that case, I think that I will have fulfilled my pledge to work with descendant communities when examining these individuals. And perhaps it's also possible that I might get the chance to work with individuals during this project who are entirely of indigenous descent and still practice the indigenous cultures of South America. But I guess I'll just have to wait and see for that.
Yeah, cool. So how did you get involved in this project? Is this something you put together? Is this something somebody else has put together and they invited you along? Is this your research, other people's research, a collaboration of research?
This is something I devised myself and basically reached out to the researchers who had unearthed this individual. But however, the people I'm working with, they're being very open about it, about what this could potentially be. They're welcoming anyone who can contribute anything to this investigation. So I am grateful to get to work with these individuals. And while this research, of course, this is also the type of research that might not necessarily be possible with a lot of the cases you work with, right? Because you deal with the United States, right?
Right.
But then again, you also right, because I think from what I understand, because you deal with private property, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think if I'm not mistaken, the private property is exempt from NAGPRA, right? Or
I I I think kind of, however, here's what I think is going to happen.
uh-huh.
And I don't know, you might know more than this. As soon as I bring in an archaeologist into the project, if I happen to find a giant, and my
Mhm.
plans is to legally and with professionals, because I'm a nobody. I just the
Uh-huh.
person that wants to know. So I bring in the professionals, the archaeologists. If there's human remains, they have to call the sheriff and report that so
Mhm.
that they
Mhm.
can
Mhm.
determine that it's not a
If someone was
a
killed,
modern day homicide or
yeah.
something. You know what I mean? So then I don't know what would happen
Mhm.
there.
Mhm.
It's in uncharted waters because
Uh-huh.
all the giants that I know of that have been found and that's just reported in newspapers and things like that, and they're saying that that's just sensationalized newspaper reporting, and they're not really real. Or if they are real, it's gigantism, things like that, and there's really never was a race of giants, and it's just a one-off type thing here and there, and 7 foot is really not that big. We've got basketball players taller than that. So
yeah, but of course, I think this, to the best of my knowledge, this would be probably the first time that anyone might potentially identify an entire quote unquote race of people that were that tall. Because today we just have like specific individuals who are that tall. In many cases, of course, it was the gigantism that makes them that tall. And you might not be allowed to share it too much about this either, in much the same way that I'm withholding certain information, but are you comfortable giving any types of updates about Brewer's Cave?
So yeah, I will give you an update on Brewer's Cave. So Brewer's Cave was on private property. Now it was bought and owned by the government, and it's been placed in a thing where you can't even dig, you can't do anything right now. And so I've been trying to work work around that. I contacted I got a lawyer out of Arizona, and we contacted a lawyer in Utah who was helped do the antiquities laws for Utah, and put him under lawyer confidentiality privileges, and not giving away the location, but telling kind of the basic story. He told me I just sell drugs, because when I get caught, I'm going to prison just the same, and I don't feel like going to prison, so it's on hold.
What were you planning on doing that he thought was going to send you to prison exactly?
Well, if you start, the NAGPRA and all that, you start digging, on a property where you're not supposed to even put a shovel in the ground, and
because it was government,
for an archaeological type thing, you're in big trouble.
Yeah.
So
why was that what you were planning on doing?
Well, my plans was to break into this tomb and find out if it was real, and then bring an archaeologist in, because I'm a nobody. Nobody's gonna believe me. I need to bring and if there's giants in stone sarcophaguses, there's no way somebody could have frauded a giant. I don't think. They could have frauded stone sarcophagus. They could fraud ancient records, but they can't fraud a giant. And I want to know who this race was. And I don't know what tests now that you got your master's, you'd know what kind of tests you could do. The only thing I could think was DNA tests, and figure out, who these people are descendants of, if anybody, or if it's a complete unknown race.
And of course,
and if this is even real, until it's found, until Brewer's Cave's broken into, until there's evidence, there's proof, it's just a story.
And now, when I last spoke to you, I remember you were saying that Brewer's Cave, that you felt that you were probably like 90% sure that you had identified it. Is that gone to 100% or?
Well, so yeah, I was. What do I want to say? I think what you were... I'm still at 90%, However, I had a gentleman that just passed away that gave me the location of where he said Brewer's Cave was, and I'm in the wrong spot where he says it is. So I've got to explore that and see, and determine. But everything I found fit. So until, like I say, until it's broken into, until there is actually giants found, it's just a story.
And also, yeah, from what I remember, like even when it was private property, the owner still didn't want people visiting it, because I think from what I heard, Brewer's wife said that she was going to shoot anyone who visits it or something like that, shoot them in the foot or something.
She was going to shoot anybody that came to her house, talking to John or her, man. She I forgot about that story. That's right. Yeah. Their family, when he told that story and it got out, people started bothering him so bad, and then calling him a fraud, and harassing the kids, harassing the family, that it tormented the fam. I mean, it was a bad deal for the family, you know. So John wished he'd have never said a word. He wished he'd have never found the thing. He claims his boy ended up dead over the thing. They He claims they captured him and tortured him, trying to get the information out of him, and he was saved by divine intervention. You know, some kids riding their bikes through the desert where they had a hold of him, and they you know, got nervous and scared and let him go. But you know, there's a lot of things happened that John claims to that family, and you talk to the kids, they did get tormented, you know, that oh man, your dad's a scam, your dad's a, you know, they got tormented. It was bad for the family.
It kind of reminds me in some ways to the situation of Mel's Hole, if you've ever heard that story, Mel's Hole.
I kind of have. Refresh
Mhm.
me. I think it was a big hole that the farmer found. He was putting stuffs in it, and they never could find that. The
Yeah,
government came in and took it over, took the
yeah,
property
basically.
from him or something.
Yeah, that's basically it. I'm sure you've heard of Coast to Coast, the radio show,
Yeah,
or Bell George Norrie, Coast to
yeah.
Coast. Yeah, a Blackfoot Indian that used to talk on that show named by the name of Red Elk used to have a lot to say about Mel's Hole. Red Elk had a lot of interesting things to talk about. He unfortunately he passed away about 8 years ago. I don't know if you ever listened to any of his interviews.
I haven't.
Mhm. I actually briefly had a phone conversation with his like basically like adopted like non-biological grandson
Cool.
who had some ideas about following in his footsteps. One of the things that I basically asked the grandson about was the business of the Thunderbirds.
I don't know about that. Other
Uh,
than you know, there's been people say that they have seen like pterodactyls, you know, every now and again here and there, especially in the late 1800s. They claim to have killed one there in Arizona. Is that what you're talking about?
sort of. I think from what I understand, the Thunderbird is more like a bird of prey, like something like basically a giant eagle, giant vulture, that type of animal. My my grandmother actually said that she saw one back in the 70s, which is when they had a lot of the sightings of the Thunderbirds. Basically, Red Elk was saying that he was gonna that a lot of them had migrated out of the country as a result of a volcanic eruption that occurred many thousands of years ago, and he was basically saying that he was going to do some type of ceremony that he believed would summon them back. But from what I understand, he unfortunately passed away before this ever got around. And I was trying to talk to his grandson to see if there was any way that someone else could someone could perform the ceremony today. And he was saying that um, Red Elk unfortunately had never divulged the location of the mountain where the ceremony needed to be done. So I guess that's that for that situation. I guess that's the end of that.
Hmm. Yeah, I had never heard that. So the back to the giants. What's you know, now that you've got your master's in
Mhm,
anthropology, you've heard all the stuff. You know, I'm sure you've read all the newspaper articles. You've heard all the stories
mhm,
of giants. You've heard all the things, and now you've gone to school, got educated. You
mhm.
know, what's your theory? Do you think they are sensationalized newspaper reporting, or do you think that there is something to it? Do you think, and I don't know if you can even ask this, do you think there is some kind of a cover up? And me personally, I think there used to be a bunch of giants in the Smithsonian, and I think they did dump them out in the lake. But I think that was part of their way to repatriate for the NABPRA laws. You know, rather than just take them and bury them somewhere or something, they just took them and dumped them out in the lake. What do you think? Can you talk about that?
Well, I'll tell you what I can say is, I mean, it's definitely I mean, there's so much that's unknown about what was going on in the Americas before Columbus, but I would not unless I could until I get the facts and the details and the data, I will not promote the idea that these were foreigners. I think it's very much possible that these giants might have just been a very a very tall population of Native Americans. I don't have any reason to be committed to the idea that the giants were the Philistines from the Bible or Scandinavians or some type of seafaring old worlders. But again, that would require probably some type of genetic analysis.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Man, I'm liking your talking. You're because you want to know the truth. You're not going to jump to conclusions, man. You're going
Uh-huh.
to dig in research and find out for
Mhm.
yourself what the truth really is. I'm
Yep.
liking that about you, Nicholas.
Yeah. And of course, and I'm sure you know this already because you're familiar with Lovelock Cave, that much of this doesn't just come from the newspaper reports at the turn of the century. A lot of this also comes from for the quote unquote folklore and quote unquote myths of the Native Americans, because a lot of their stories talk about giants as well.
Yes.
A famous one apart from Lovelock Cave is also the giants in David Cusick's A History of the Six Nations. David Cusick basically recorded a lot of the history of the Iroquois. Unfortunately, I'm not going to say this individual's name, but I have conversed with a descendant of David Cusick, an Iroquois descendant of David Cusick, and he is explained that he's not comfortable having anyone examine alleged giant remains in Iroquois territory.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is that I think in some ways Native Americans have an affinity with these individuals, that even though in some cases they went to war with them and killed them, like in the case of Lovelock Cave, they can now relate to them as being brethren, in the sense that these giants were fellow inhabitants of the New World that existed prior to Columbus and the Europeans. So I think in that sense, then the post-Columbian world, they felt some kinship with these individuals, even though they might have had hostilities with them while they were alive. And I think that can tell you a lot about how symbolic, how non-uniform and non-constant, and how like malleable the notion of race and culture can be. That the same people who were at war with each other at one time in the future, the modern day Native Americans do. And in this case, this descendant of David Cusick actually referred to the alleged giants as his ancestors, as his brothers and sisters. Because one of the things, of course, they teach you when you go to school for anthropology is that we're all one race. The whole planet is one race, one group of people. You know.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So while it is unfortunate that it might not be possible to examine these individuals, I think in some ways there is some positivity that can come out of this, in the sense that it can show you the types of solidarity that can form between individuals that superficially might seem quite different from one another. If there's anything good to come out of that predicament.
So back to the sensationalized newspaper reporting, there's more than just sensationalized newspaper reporting, if that's what you call it. If you get, checking through the Spanish documents, you have some of these expedition leaders writing and talking about that they ran into some of these giants. So it's more than just the newspaper sensationalization to sell newspapers. What was the purpose of these expedition leaders to write in their journals about what they saw about these giants? They're not selling newspapers, or I don't know why would they sensationalize? Man, I can't even say it right now. Yeah.
Sensationalized. I mean, to be the devil's advocate, of course, somebody might say maybe it was just to impress people back home as to how spectacular their adventures in the New World were. But of course, at the end of the day, I guess you could say that's the closest we can come to actual historical documents of what was going on when the Spaniards first stepped foot in the New World, because they would basically be, again, a glimpse of a world that would quickly disappear. Many populations would die off. I'm sure in many cases, even the wildlife would die off due to the the way in which the environments were transformed in the post-Columbian world. So it was the very last glimpse anyone would get of the pristinity of the New World, of what was once the, for lack of a better term, untamed wilderness of the New World. And in some ways, of course, you can be enviable. Yes, it was a very difficult journeys they went on. But in some cases, these would have also been quite rewarding journeys, in that they would get to see what nobody had ever seen before, and from nobody in Europe had ever seen before, and really no one in Europe would ever see again, because the New World would quickly be transformed.
So in your research, you're trying to figure out then who this person might have been, what culture, if he fits into a culture, if it's a different culture, if it's is there a way to telling if it's really gigantism, or if it's or unless you found a mass site, a mass burial of these giants, and then how do you know it's just not a burial site of a basketball team or a gigantic warrior team? You know what I mean?
Yes, those are the type of nuances that are difficult to unravel. But what I would say is that you would have to look at who these individuals might have been, try to see were these all warriors, or were some of them craftsmen? Did they follow other occupations? In that case, it would probably lend more credence to the notion that this was an entire population of individuals of great stature, which is also why the researchers I'm working with are hoping to do some ground penetrating radar that could help determine if there's other individuals in this area that can be compared to this initial quote unquote giant. If the other individuals that were buried in the proximity were shorter than them, the same height as them, perhaps even some of them maybe even taller than him. Yeah, that's of course the first step.
So I got to ask you, so can you say, has there been, is there just bones found as of now? Has there been any artifacts, any metals, any writings, any artifacts found with these? Do you know?
Well, from what I understand, they believe this individual is approximately 1,000 years old, and so yeah, it's basically the pottery styles.
So there is pottery and stuff with them.
Yeah, so I believe it's pottery. Yeah, probably that would be probably the biggest identificator of what culture this individual might have been from. Of course.
So has anybody done any studying yet? Are they identifying the culture with this pottery, with this individual, or is that study hasn't been done yet, and that's what you hope to do and help to do? And
well, I probably wouldn't be working too much with the pottery. Basically, what I hope to do is to formally, using much more empirical methods, to determine exactly how tall this individual might have been, and also to compare his height with that of the individuals that are buried in his proximity. It's also important to note that even if the artifacts that he's found with or belong to a specific culture, just because he died in that culture doesn't mean he was necessarily born into that culture as well.
That's true.
Perhaps he originated with another culture of giants, but then he moved into this area, and that could also help explain why he was taller than the individuals he was buried with, because he wasn't actually from that ethnic group. And that would be probably the most difficult thing to determine, if this individual,
I gotta agree with that, yeah,
was actually born into the culture that he died in.
Well, Nicholas, have you got anything else you want to share?
I would say that, yeah, I guess that's it for now, but perhaps maybe you'd be interested in having me again.
Heck yeah, I'm just gonna say, man, you better keep me posted. You better keep me posted on what's going on. Awesome. Well, Nicholas, man, I appreciate you, man. I'm proud of you for your studies, for your interest in this type of thing. And with that said, that's a wrap.